The scratch of my pen against the paper was the only sound in my cell. I paused, flexing my cramped fingers, before continuing to write. The government-issued ballpoint pen, clear plastic, nothing that could be fashioned into a weapon, left faint blue trails across the page as I documented what would likely be my final testament. August 17th, 2022, day 412 of my imprisonment and my last day alive. I glanced up at the camera mounted in the corner of my ceiling. They thought providing me with paper and pens was a kindness, a psychological comfort to prevent me from completely unraveling. Little did they know I was using their kindness to preserve the truth they so desperately wanted buried. "Dr. Reeves, lights out in 30 minutes, came the disembodied voice through the intercom. I didn't bother responding. Agent Thomas was on duty tonight, the only one who sometimes engaged in actual conversation. The others treated me like a specimen rather than a person. My cell at the Nexus facility was sparse. A narrow bed with a thin mattress bolted to the wall, a stainless steel toilet and sink combination in the corner, and a small metal desk where I now sat. No windows, no natural light. The fluorescent bulbs embedded in the ceiling marked the artificial passage of day and night. Controlled by someone else's schedule, I returned to my frantic writing. To whoever finds this. My name is Dr. Eliza Reeves, a quantum physicist. I am not insane, despite what my captors claim. What happened at Meridian Labs was an accident. I was never meant to witness Project 314. What I saw there changed everything I thought I knew about physics, and the potentially catastrophic consequences of manipulating time. I paused, tapping my fingers in sequence. Index, middle, ring, pinky. A nervous habit I developed over months of confinement. My hair had grown long during my imprisonment, and I tucked a loose strand behind my ear as I considered my next words. The official story was that I'd suffered a psychotic break after my research team's quantum computing project failed. A convenient narrative that explained my disappearance from the scientific community. My colleagues probably believed I was receiving treatment at some private facility. Only Director Stern, Dr. Wells, and a handful of security personnel knew the truth. I was being held because I had accidentally witnessed the government's classified time travel experiment. I still remembered Wells's face when he found me in the restricted lab section, his expression shifting from shock to resignation. He had been my mentor, my friend. Now he was complicit in my imprisonment. "It's for national security, Eliza," he had told me the last time he visited, 6 months ago. "Just cooperate and eventually they'll let you out." But I knew better. I'd overheard enough fragments of conversation between guards to understand that relocation was imminent. In government speak, that meant elimination. I was a liability they could no longer afford to maintain. I continued writing. They promised release if I cooperated. That was a lie. I've heard the guards talking. Relocation is scheduled for August 20th. 3 days from now. I won't see the outside of this facility alive. Project 314 successfully sent organic matter backward in time. I saw the recordings and the data. But there was something wrong with the returned specimens. Something fundamentally altered at the quantum level. Dr. Wells knows this, but continues the experiments regardless. The implications for causality alone should have halted the project. The ventilation system clicked, cycling to its night mode. I glanced at the camera again, then quickly back to my paper. I had perhaps 20 minutes before lights out, when the night guard would make his rounds. I needed to hide this page before then. Over months, I'd discovered tiny hiding spaces throughout my cell, behind the loose metal panel under my sink, within the hollowed-out spine of the quantum physics textbook they'd allowed me to keep, taped to the underside of my desk. Small caches of truth scattered like seeds. hoping at least one would take root someday. I finished the page with hurried handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. But the truth about Project 314 must be exposed. Time is not meant to be manipulated this way. The quantum entanglement disruption I witnessed in the test subjects suggests catastrophic consequences on a universal scale if they proceed to human trials. Find Dr. Marcus Wells at Meridian Labs. Make him talk about the temporal echoes in Test Series 7B. The evidence is there. The intercom crackled to life again. Dr. Reeves, 15 minutes until lights out. Thank you, Agent Thomas, I replied, injecting false calm into my voice. I quickly folded the paper into a tight square. Rising from my desk, I moved to my bed and sat down, bouncing slightly to test the springs. When the mattress compressed, I slipped my hand between it and the frame, feeling for the small tear I'd made months ago in the underside fabric. Finding it, I pushed the folded paper deep inside, joining the 5 other pages I'd hidden there. Returning to my desk, I pulled out a fresh sheet and began writing a decoy letter, an innocuous journal entry about my day that the guards would find during their regular searches. I detailed the bland breakfast I'd been served, a fictional conversation with a guard, mundane thoughts that would satisfy anyone monitoring my psychological state. As I wrote, my mind raced with the memory of what I'd witnessed in the lab that day. The small white rat disappearing in a flash of blue light, only to reappear seconds later. Same rat, the same markings, but its behavior was completely different. Its DNA subtly changed. And the readings on the quantum state analyzer, impossible values that defied everything we understood about physics. Wells had been ecstatic. I had been horrified. The lights dimmed once, a 1-minute warning. I quickly finished my decoy journal entry and left it visible on the desk. Then I moved to the sink, washing my hands meticulously to remove any ink stains that might betray my real activities. The main lights shut off, leaving only the dim safety light near the floor. I lay on my bed, staring at the featureless ceiling, my mind churning with formulas and variables, quantum calculations that might explain what I'd seen. In the darkness, I whispered to myself, "Someone will find the truth." I had to believe that. It was the only thing keeping me sane after 412 days in this box. My fingers tapped against the thin blanket, index, middle, ring, pinky, as I contemplated the 3 days I had left, and how many more pages I could hide before they came for me. I still tried to imagine it, to picture myself back on that day in June, the day when everything had seemed possible, when hope had been my only companion and the future lay ahead of me without any restrictions. Back then, I hadn't known that all of this would come to pass, that it would lead me to this moment. As I tried to fall asleep, I thought about what my life had been like back then. The Stanford campus, with its palm trees and bright sun, so much different from this dark place. But it was also here that it had all begun. I hadn't seen it then, of course. How could I have? But as Dr. Wells approached me with his offer, I could never have imagined what awaited me. June 2017, 5 years before my imprisonment. The memory was so vivid, it almost felt like another form of time travel. Back to that brilliant June day when I stood beneath Stanford's swaying palm trees, diploma in hand, the weight of my academic honors making me stand a little taller. Dr. Eliza Reeves. I whispered to myself, tasting the title for the first time. The California sun had been warm on my face, and my graduation gown was surprisingly heavy in the heat. My fingers tapped their sequence against the leather folder holding my doctorate. Index, middle, ring, pinky. A habit even then. That was the day Dr. Marcus Wells approached me. I spotted him before he reached me, tall, distinguished, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. Even then, he carried himself with that unmistakable air of academic authority. "Dr. Reeves," he said, extending his hand, "your dissertation on quantum entanglement across variable distances was remarkable, particularly your theories on information preservation." I shook his hand, trying to contain my excitement. "Thank you, Dr. Wells. Your work on quantum superposition has been foundational to my research." He smiled, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "I wonder if you might be interested in putting those theories into practice. I'm assembling a research team at the Boulder Quantum Research Center. We're working on something that would benefit greatly from your expertise." "Quantum communication?" I ventured, hardly daring to hope. "Precisely." His dark eyes sparked with enthusiasm. "The implications for secure transmission of information are extraordinary. We believe we're on the verge of a breakthrough." 2 weeks later, I found myself in Boulder, Colorado, unpacking my modest belongings in a small apartment near the research center. The mountains loomed majestically outside my window, a constant reminder of how far I'd come from my cramped graduate student housing in Palo Alto. The facility itself was impressive. Gleaming laboratories filled with cutting-edge equipment, brilliant minds collaborating in an atmosphere of intellectual fervor. For the first 6 months, I worked diligently on what I believed was advanced quantum communication technology. My days were spent refining receiver configurations and testing entanglement preservation across increasing distances. Then came the day Wells called me into his private office. "Close the door, Eliza," he said, his voice uncharacteristically tense. I complied, noting the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his glasses. "You've done exceptional work," he began, pacing behind his desk. "Your innovations with the receiver arrays have exceeded our expectations." "Thank you, sir," I replied, uncertain where the conversation was headed. He stopped pacing and looked at me intently. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. You'll need to sign additional confidentiality agreements, but first, I want to gauge your reaction." My curiosity was piqued. "I'm listening." "We're not developing quantum communication, at least not in the conventional sense." He took a deep breath. "Project 314 is focused on temporal information transfer." I stared at him, processing his words. "Temporal? You mean we're sending information backward in time, Eliza?" His voice dropped to a near whisper, despite us being alone in his secure office. "Through quantum entanglement, we've discovered a method to transmit data to our own past." The implications hit me with such force that I had to sit down. That's impossible." "We thought so too." His eyes gleamed with the fervor I would later recognize as dangerous obsession. "But the math checks out. Your math, actually. Your dissertation's theories on information preservation across quantum states provided the missing piece." I shook my head, trying to absorb what he was saying. "But the paradoxes alone are manageable, within strict parameters," he interrupted. "The limitations are significant. Messages can only travel to pre-installed receivers at the exact same location. The slightest interference can drastically alter the future timeline." My mind raced through calculations, possibilities, implications. This violates every fundamental principle of causality. Or perhaps it reveals that causality is more flexible than we previously understood. Wells leaned forward. "Think about it, Eliza. The ability to send warnings to ourselves, to prevent disasters, to redirect the course of human history for the better." I looked up at him suddenly, understanding why my work had been so carefully directed. "The receiver arrays I've been configuring are temporal receivers," he confirmed, "designed to intercept information from our future selves." In the weeks that followed, I was introduced to the full scope of Project 314. My security clearance was elevated, my work area relocated to a more secure section of the facility. My specific assignment was monitoring the primary temporal receiver, essentially waiting for a message from the future that would confirm our theory worked. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The receiver remained silent. Nothing again today, I reported to Wells one evening, nearly a year into my new assignment. We were alone in the lab, the other researchers having gone home hours ago. He frowned, examining my logs. The calculations are sound. The equipment is functioning perfectly. Maybe there's nothing to receive, I suggested, voicing the doubt that had been growing steadily. Maybe it isn't possible after all. Or maybe our future selves haven't needed to send anything back yet, Wells countered, his faith unwavering. Perhaps no crisis has arisen that would necessitate temporal communication. I gestured toward the silent equipment. Or perhaps we've created an elaborate receiver for messages that can never be sent. Patience, Dr. Reeves. His voice had that edge he used when he felt challenged. Science requires persistence. The Wright brothers didn't achieve flight on their first attempt. The Wright brothers weren't trying to violate the fundamental laws of physics, I muttered. He gave me a sharp look. Neither are we. We're expanding our understanding of those laws. Days became months. Months became years. The receiver remained stubbornly silent. My initial excitement had long since given way to monotonous routine. Checking calibrations, running diagnostics, staring at empty readouts. Each night I'd archive another day of non-results, questioning whether we were pioneers or fools. What if the reason we never receive a message, I asked Wells during my 3rd year on the project, is because something goes catastrophically wrong? What if the very act of sending information back destroys the future from which it's sent? Wells dismissed my concerns with a wave of his hand. You're thinking too linearly, Eliza. Quantum mechanics doesn't work that way. We don't know how temporal mechanics works, I countered. That's my point. But he was already moving on to other aspects of the project, his obsession blinding him to the dangers I was beginning to see. And still, I stayed, my scientific curiosity overriding my growing unease. I told myself I was being cautious, monitoring for problems, serving as the voice of reason. I never imagined that 4 years later I would accidentally discover what Project 314 had evolved into. Not just information transfer, but actual material transport through time. I couldn't have known that my questions would eventually lead to my imprisonment, or that the same silent receiver I'd monitored for years would become central to the government's most dangerous experiment. In my cell, my fingers resumed their tapping sequence against the thin blanket, index, middle, ring, pinky, as I reflected on how differently things might have turned out if I'd walked away when the receiver remained silent. But scientific curiosity is its own form of entanglement, binding us to outcomes we cannot predict or escape. I often wonder if scientific curiosity is its own form of curse. That thought haunted me as I sat in my cell, remembering how differently my life might have unfolded if I'd walked away from Project 314 years earlier. But I hadn't. Instead, my dedication to understanding quantum mechanics led me inexorably to June 12th, 2021, the day everything changed. It was late, nearly midnight. The facility had emptied hours ago, but I remained at my terminal, running one last diagnostic on the perpetually silent temporal receiver. My coffee had gone cold, my eyes strained from staring at scrolling data. Just as I was preparing to log off, a sharp ping echoed through the empty lab. I froze, my finger hovering over the keyboard. That sound, and the notification we'd programmed years ago but had never actually heard. The receiver indicator flashed green. "Impossible," I whispered, my heart suddenly pounding. The message was brief, appearing in stark white text against the black terminal screen. "Do not go to work tomorrow." I stared at it, uncomprehending at first. After 4 years of silence, this was what came through. No technical data, no scientific breakthrough, just a cryptic warning. My fingers automatically began their familiar tapping sequence, index, middle, ring, pinky, as I analyzed the message. The timestamp indicated it had originated 47 hours in the future. I ran a verification protocol, checking for system anomalies. This has to be a glitch, I muttered to myself, scrolling through diagnostic reports. Everything appeared normal, but I couldn't accept that our first temporal message would be something so mundane, so personal. I copied the data to my secure drive and sent a brief email to Wells. Anomalous signal received. We'll discuss in morning. Then I shut down my station and gathered my things, dismissing the message as a system error. Perhaps a routine update gone wrong, or even someone's idea of a prank. That night I barely slept, my mind churning through possibilities. By morning I'd convinced myself it was nothing significant. Important enough to report, certainly, but not enough to keep me from my scheduled experiments. I went to work as usual. The Boulder facility hummed with its normal morning activity. I nodded to colleagues in the hallway, swiped my badge at 3 separate security checkpoints, and made my way to my lab in the East Wing. Wells wasn't in yet. Unusual, given his typically early arrivals. At 9:45 a.m., I was deep in analysis of the previous night's message when Dr. Chen from Quantum Computing poked his head into my lab. "Reeves, do you have the specs for the new entanglement array? Engineering needs them for the installation this afternoon." "They should be in the shared drive," I replied without looking up. "Under Project 314, Phase 2. I checked. They're not there." I sighed, finally meeting his gaze. "They might be in the backup server. That's in the West Wing, though. I can get them after my diagnostic runs." "No need. I'm heading that way for a meeting. I'll grab them." Chen left and I returned to my analysis. The message still made no sense, and I could find no signature in it that definitively proved it came from the future. Something about it nagged at me, though, a certain authenticity in its simplicity. At precisely 10:17 a.m., the building shuddered. A deep, resonant boom rolled through the structure, followed by the high-pitched wail of emergency alarms. The lights flickered once, twice. Then emergency systems kicked in, bathing everything in harsh, red illumination. "Attention all personnel," blared the automated voice over the intercom. "This is not a drill. Evacuate immediately. Proceed to your designated assembly areas." I rose, knocking over my chair in sudden panic. The message: "Do not go to work tomorrow." Through the lab windows, I could see people running down the corridor. Smoke was beginning to drift through the ventilation system. My hands shook as I quickly downloaded the message data to my portable drive before heading for the exit. Outside, chaos reigned. People streamed from various exits, many coughing, some bleeding. Emergency responders were already arriving, sirens wailing as they pulled into the facility grounds. I stood in the parking lot, watching in horror as thick, black smoke billowed from the West Wing, precisely where Chen had been heading. "What happened?" I asked a security guard who was helping direct people to safety. "Some kind of explosion in the West Wing," he replied grimly. "R&D section." Hours passed in a blur of emergency vehicles, medical teams, and gathering crowds of shocked employees. The casualty reports started filtering through. 5 dead, then 12, then 19. Chen's name was among them. When I could finally access a secure terminal in one of the emergency command posts, I pulled up the message logs. Again. This time, I ran a more sophisticated trace. What I found made my blood run cold. The quantum signature matched my own personal encryption key, one I'd developed specifically for Project 314. This message hadn't just come from the future, it had come from me. Dr. Reeves." The voice behind me was cool, professional. I turned to find Director Catherine Stern standing there, flanked by two men in dark suits. Despite the chaos around us, she looked immaculate. Not a blonde hair out of place, her navy suit pristine. "Director Stern," I acknowledged, quickly closing the terminal window. "I wasn't aware you were involved with our facility." "There are many things you're not aware of, Doctor." Her piercing blue eyes seemed to see right through me. "I need you to come with me for debriefing." "Of course, but I should really check on my colleagues first." "That won't be necessary. Your colleagues are being taken care of." Her tone left no room for argument. Before I could respond, Wells appeared, looking haggard and disheveled. When he saw Stern, his face paled. "Catherine, I didn't expect you so soon." "Circumstances demanded an immediate response, Marcus." She gestured to her companions. "My team will need full access to all Project 314 data." Wells nodded mechanically, then noticed me. "Eliza, thank God you're safe. When I heard the explosion, I received a warning," I said quietly. "Last night, on the receiver." His eyes widened, genuine panic flashing across his face. "What? Why didn't you—" "I emailed you," I replied, watching his reaction closely. "I thought it was a system error." Wells glanced nervously at Stern, who was observing our exchange with unsettling intensity. "What kind of warning?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do not go to work tomorrow." It came from the future. I paused, then added, "From me." The color drained completely from his face. "You're certain?" I verified the quantum signature. It was mine. Stern stepped between us. "That's enough, Dr. Reeves. Dr. Wells will continue this discussion in private." That evening, I returned to my apartment in a daze. 19 colleagues dead. A message from my future self that I'd ignored. Wells's reaction confirmed what I already knew. The message was authentic. Somehow I had sent a warning from the future, and I had failed to heed it. I was packing an overnight bag, planning to stay with a friend. My apartment felt too empty, too quiet after the day's horrors, when I heard a vehicle pull up outside. Heavy footsteps approached my door. Before I could react, the lock shattered and armed men in tactical gear swarmed inside. "Dr. Eliza Reeves," one of them announced. "You're being detained under national security provisions." I backed away, hands raised. On what grounds? No one answered. Two men seized my arms while another prepared a syringe. "What is that? No, you can't." The needle pierced my skin. Almost immediately, the room began to tilt and sway. My last conscious thought was of the message. How different things might have been if I'd simply stayed home. My world went black, the beginning of a darkness that would envelop the next 412 days of my life. I awoke to the dull sound of air conditioning and the faint antiseptic smell of a medical facility. My mouth felt like cotton, my limbs weighted with lead. The ceiling above me was bright white and unfamiliar. As consciousness crept back, fragments of memory returned, armed men in my apartment. The needle, then darkness. I tried to sit up, only to discover I was restrained at the wrists and ankles. Panic surged through me. "She's awake," someone said. A face appeared in my field of vision. Director Catherine Stern, her blonde bob as immaculate as ever. Piercing blue eyes studying me with clinical detachment. "Dr. Reeves," she said calmly, "please don't struggle. The restraints are a precaution until we're certain you won't harm yourself. Where am I?" My voice emerged as a rasp. "The Nexus facility. You're approximately 300 feet underground in a secure installation in the Arizona desert." Arizona. over 800 miles from Boulder. I pulled against the restraints again, uselessly. Why am I here? What do you want from me? The words scraped against my dry throat. Director Stern nodded to someone out of my sight. A moment later, the restraints on my wrists loosened. A cup of water appeared before me, held by a young nurse. Sit up slowly, Stern instructed. Drink. I complied, my hands shaking as I took the cup. The cool water was a blessed relief as it slid down my parched throat. The explosion at the Boulder facility wasn't an accident, Stern said once I'd drained the cup. It was sabotage. Foreign agents targeting our quantum research program. I stared at her. That's impossible. The facility's security was compromised. Her voice was flat, brooking no argument. 19 of your colleagues are dead, Dr. Reeves, because someone wanted to stop Project 314. My fingers began their familiar sequence, index, middle, ring, pinky, against the paper cup. What does this have to do with me? Why am I here? Stern's thin lips curved into what might have been a smile on anyone else. On her, it looked predatory. Because you received a message from the future. Your own message. That proves Project 314 works. The implication struck me like a physical blow. You want me to continue my research? After what happened? We need you to continue your research because of what happened. She took the empty cup from my trembling hands. Your work is now classified at the highest level of national security. You will help us perfect temporal communication. And if I refuse? I asked, already knowing the answer. Her blue eyes hardened. That's not an option, Dr. Reeves. Your country needs you. The restraints on my ankles were released. 2 armed guards materialized at the doorway of what I now realized was a small medical room. Dr. Wells will brief you on your new working conditions, Stern said, turning to leave. I suggest you cooperate fully. The sooner we achieve our objectives, the sooner you can return to your normal life. It was a lie, and we both knew it. There would be no going back. The lab they took me to was a near-perfect replica of my workspace in Boulder, down to the arrangement of equipment and even the brand of coffee in the small kitchenette. The familiarity was clearly intentional, designed to make me comfortable, productive. Wells was waiting for me, standing awkwardly by the main terminal. His silver hair seemed duller somehow, his tall frame slightly stooped. When he turned to face me, I barely recognized him. The confident academic I had known for years was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes darted nervously around the room, never quite meeting mine. Eliza, he said, his voice unnaturally bright. I'm so glad you're here. We have important work to do. Are you a prisoner too? I asked quietly. His smile faltered. None of us are prisoners. We're serving our country, protecting our people. They abducted me at gunpoint, Marcus. Wells glanced at the camera mounted in the corner of the lab. That was an unfortunate misunderstanding. The situation was urgent. I followed his gaze to the camera, then noticed others, at least 6 visible monitoring devices around the room. Constant surveillance. What exactly do they want me to do? I asked, though I already knew. Wells seemed relieved by the change in subject. You'll be continuing your work on temporal messaging with a new focus. We need to send targeted warnings to specific points in the past to prevent disasters like the explosion. Exactly. He led me to the main workstation, his hands trembling slightly as he swiped his ID card to unlock the terminal. We've enhanced the receiver array based on your earlier designs. The transmission capacity is significantly improved. The screen lit up with familiar code, my code, but with modifications. As I skimmed through it, I realized they had indeed made significant advances. The potential message complexity had increased tenfold. Who did this work? I asked, genuinely impressed despite myself. A team, working from your foundation. Wells finally met my eyes. Eliza, what you created was revolutionary. Now, we need to use it to save lives. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the old Wells, the passionate scientist who had once inspired me. But it faded quickly, replaced by that nervous, haunted look. Your first assignment, he continued, retrieving a tablet from a nearby desk, is to send a warning about the boulder explosion back to yourself. I took the tablet. On it was a detailed dossier about the explosion, casualty reports, structural damage assessments, and a preliminary investigation suggesting an explosive device had been placed in the West Wing server room. You want me to send the exact message I already received? Do not go to work tomorrow. Wells nodded. We need to confirm message consistency across timeline alterations. It's also your chance to save those 19 lives. My heart clenched at the thought. Chen, the others. Could I really save them? And after that? I asked. There are other incidents we've identified where advance warning could prevent significant casualties. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The Nexus facility was indeed a labyrinth, a sprawling underground complex of laboratories, living quarters, and security checkpoints. I never saw the sun, never breathed fresh air. My world contracted to the path between my quarters, the lab, and the small cafeteria where I took my meals. The temporal messaging work progressed rapidly. Under the watchful eyes of military personnel and a rotating team of scientists, I refined the technology to send increasingly complex messages. I successfully transmitted the warning about the boulder explosion back to myself, experiencing the strange dissonance of knowing I was creating a causal loop. Then came other warnings. A bridge collapse in Michigan, a wildfire that threatened a California suburb, a terrorist attack in Dallas. Each time I crafted careful messages with just enough information to prevent disaster without revealing the source. Each time, reports came back confirming lives saved. 37 people who would have died on that bridge are alive because of you, Wells told me one evening, his voice low enough that the microphones might not pick it up. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. The alternative, that I was being manipulated, that the reports were fabricated, was too horrible to contemplate. So I complied, day after day, telling myself I was saving lives. But as the months passed, I noticed things. Small inconsistencies in the reports. The way certain scientists would whisper when they thought I couldn't hear. The increasing rigidity of Director Stern's demands. And Wells, he grew more distant, more nervous. Sometimes I caught him staring at me with something like regret in his eyes, only to look away when I noticed. One night, alone in my quarters, I pressed my ear against the wall and heard voices from the adjacent lab, voices that shouldn't have been there at that hour. The temporal disruption is growing with each transmission, someone said urgently. We can't contain it much longer. Director Stern wants results, another voice replied. The quantum signatures are almost stable enough for the next phase. I pulled away, my heart racing. Next phase? What weren't they telling me? In that moment, buried beneath the Arizona desert with no means of escape, I realized I might be helping to create something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The conversation I'd overheard that night haunted me for weeks. I tried to focus on my assigned work, but doubts crept in like shadows at dusk, impossible to ignore. January 2022 marked my 7th month at the Nexus facility. My fingers tapped their familiar pattern. Index, middle, ring, pinky. As I worked late one evening, officially calibrating the primary temporal receiver. The guards had grown accustomed to my night shifts. They merely nodded when I told them I needed to run extended diagnostics. I was reaching behind the main console to adjust a connection when my hand brushed against something unexpected. a small metal box partially concealed by cable housing. My heart stuttered. I recognized it immediately, despite the years that had passed. An auxiliary receiver I'd built as a backup during Project 314's early days. Small enough to escape notice during the facility replication. They had copied my lab so perfectly they'd inadvertently brought my secret creation with it. I glanced at the camera in the corner. Its red light blinked steadily. Careful to keep my movements casual, I repositioned myself to block the camera's view and quickly examined the device. The power indicator glowed faintly. It was still functional, drawing minimal current from the main system. "Dr. Reeves," came a voice through the intercom. "Status update?" I straightened immediately. "Still working on those calibrations, Agent Thomas. The primary receiver is showing quantum fluctuations I need to stabilize." "Understood. 30 minutes until shift change." The auxiliary receiver operated on a different frequency than the main system, one I'd designed specifically to avoid detection. If it was receiving messages, they wouldn't be monitored by Nexus security protocols. When Thomas announced his break 10 minutes later, I seized my chance. I quickly connected my tablet to the auxiliary device and downloaded its log. 3 messages had been received, all within the past week. The first one made my blood run cold. Trust no one. The second was more specific. Check the pattern alpha files. The third delivered the devastating truth. The disasters are manufactured. I disconnected hastily as footsteps approached. The next guard beginning rounds. Pattern Alpha. I'd heard that designation before in whispered conversations between Wells and Director Stern. A classified subset of Project 314 data that I didn't have clearance to access. Over the next week, I crafted my plan carefully. I observed guard rotations, camera patterns, and security protocols. I noted when the system ran automated backups, temporarily reducing surveillance sensitivity. Most importantly, I watched Wells, tracking when he accessed the secure servers, memorizing his authorization sequences from a distance. On January 17th, I made my move. The night shift was Agent Thomas's again, the one guard who showed me basic human kindness. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Doctor," he remarked as he passed my lab at 2 a.m., finding me still working. "Just following orders," I replied with a weary smile. "Director Stern wants these projections by morning." He nodded sympathetically. "I'll be in the East Corridor if you need anything." Perfect. The furthest point from the secure server room during his rotation. At 2:47 a.m. during the automated system backup, I slipped into the dimly lit corridor. My access card worked for this section, but the alarm would trigger if I entered the server room. I'd prepared for this. At precisely 2:50 a.m., a cascading diagnostic I'd programmed earlier began, triggering minor alerts throughout the environmental control system. Nothing serious enough to cause alarm, but sufficient to distract the monitoring staff. Inside the server room, I worked quickly, using Wells's authorization code, a complex sequence I'd pieced together over weeks of careful observation. The pattern alpha files opened before me, a treasure trove of classified data. What I found turned my stomach. Detailed analyses of target events. The very disasters I'd been sending warnings about. But they weren't natural catastrophes or foreign terrorist attacks. They were meticulously planned operations, orchestrated by our own government using temporal information to maximize impact. The Michigan Bridge collapse, engineered to eliminate a federal prosecutor traveling to a grand jury hearing about defense contract fraud. The California wildfire, strategically ignited to destroy evidence at a private research facility investigating governmental abuse of surveillance technology. The Dallas attack, staged to justify increased funding for Project 314 and expand domestic surveillance powers. And the Boulder explosion, I gasped as I read the file. It wasn't targeting foreign agents. It was eliminating my colleagues who had discovered fragments of the truth about Project 314. Chen had stumbled upon unauthorized temporal experiments. He and 18 others died because they knew too much. I downloaded everything I could, hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped my tablet. As I was finishing, the door to the server room slid open. Dr. Marcus Wells stood in the doorway. My heart plummeted. After all my careful planning, I'd failed to account for Wells's own late-night habits. "Eliza." His voice was oddly calm. "I've been expecting this." I braced myself for alarms, for guards rushing in. Instead, Wells stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "You need to be more careful," he said quietly, moving to the terminal beside me. "The cameras in this room operate on a separate circuit. They don't go down during system backups." He typed rapidly, fingers dancing across the keyboard. "I've looped the feed for the next 10 minutes. It will show both of us reviewing authorized files." I stared at him, unable to process this turn of events. "You're helping me?" "I've been trying to help you for months." His voice cracked slightly. "But they're always watching, always listening." "The disasters," I began, "are exactly what you think they are." His eyes, behind those wire-rimmed glasses, were haunted. Manufactured crises to serve political agendas, manipulate financial markets, eliminate threats. Why? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Wells rubbed his face, suddenly looking every one of his 50-plus years. It started small. Theoretical discussions about how targeted temporal information could benefit national security. Then small interventions, preventing genuine disasters, as we claimed we were doing. But power corrupts, Eliza. The ability to manipulate time. It's intoxicating to those who crave control. And you went along with this? I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. His expression hardened. "They have my daughter and grandson. Catherine made it very clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate." He gestured to the screen. "But I've been documenting everything, building a case. I just couldn't risk moving against them until I had help." From me. From you." He nodded. "Your auxiliary receiver, brilliant design, by the way. I discovered it months ago, but left it functioning. I suspected you might find it eventually." A chill ran through me. "The messages, they weren't from my future self, were they?" "No." Wells looked away. "They were from me. I couldn't approach you directly. Too dangerous." I processed this as my fingers automatically began their tapping sequence. "So what now?" "Now we gather more evidence. Carefully, methodically." Wells pulled a small device from his pocket, a quantum encryption key. "Use this to access my private server. I've been collecting proof of their operations for over a year." "To do what?" I asked, taking the device. "We're trapped in a secret underground facility. Who could we possibly reach? There are people on the outside. People who suspect something isn't right about certain coincidences in world events." Wells checked his watch. "We have 3 minutes before the camera loop ends. Take what you have and go back to your lab. Act normal. Continue your assigned work. And then we find a way to expose them." His expression was grim but determined. "Because the next phase they're planning goes beyond manipulating disasters, Eliza. They're preparing for direct temporal intervention." "Human trials," I whispered, remembering the conversation I'd overheard. "Worse." Wells' voice dropped even lower. "They want to send operatives back through time. Not just messages, people. Despite all evidence showing the quantum disruption would be catastrophic." The implications stunned me. The messages I'd been sending were already causing temporal instability. Sending an entire person would be exponentially more disruptive. Go, Wells urged as his watch beeped softly. We'll talk again when it's safe. I slipped back to my lab, mind reeling from revelations that were worse than I'd imagined. The government wasn't just manipulating time to save lives. They were weaponizing it, manufacturing tragedies to reshape the world according to their agenda. As I sat at my workstation, pretending to analyze temporal frequencies while actually examining the horrific evidence I'd gathered, I realized the truth that would define the coming months of my imprisonment. I wasn't fighting to escape the Nexus facility anymore. I was fighting to stop them from destroying the very fabric of time itself. My fingers tapped their anxious rhythm against the console, index, middle, ring, pinky, as I contemplated the truth. The disasters were manufactured. People had died not by chance, but by design. And somewhere deep within the Nexus facility, Director Stern and her team were preparing something even worse. By late April 2022, I'd begun to measure time differently. Not by the artificial light cycles of the Nexus facility or the digital calendar on my tablet, but by the growing collection of evidence Wells and I had accumulated. Each file, each recording, each fragment of data was another day closer to exposing the truth. My quarters were exactly as they'd been 3 months ago when Wells first helped me access the Pattern Alpha files. The same sterile walls, the same surveillance camera, in the corner, with its steadily blinking red light. But beneath my mattress lay a quantum encryption key, holding secrets that could bring down governments. I sat at my desk, reviewing temporal stability reports that showed increasing degradation with each transmission, evidence I'd been secretly documenting. My fingers tapped their familiar rhythm against the edge of the tablet, index, middle, ring, pinky. The door slid open without warning. I quickly switched screens as Wells stepped in, his silver hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. "Recalibration of the auxiliary receiver is complete," he announced loudly for the benefit of the surveillance. Then he placed his tablet beside mine, angling it away from the camera. On his screen was a message. "Found Chronos files. Emergency meeting tonight. 0200. I nodded slightly, keeping my expression neutral. "The temporal fluctuations are still within acceptable parameters," I replied, matching his professional tone, "though I'm concerned about the quantum decay rate in Sector 7. Wells made a show of examining my fabricated data while typing another message. "Stern takes orders from them. She's expendable." The realization struck me like a physical blow. Director Stern, the woman I'd believed was orchestrating everything, was merely a mid-level operative in a much larger conspiracy. "I'll make the necessary adjustments," Wells said, collecting his tablet. "The director expects results by morning." "I'll continue monitoring from here," I replied. When he left, I sat motionless, digesting this new information. Not just Stern, but a shadow committee called Chronos. The rabbit hole went deeper than I'd imagined. The service corridor between Laboratory 6 and the East Wing maintenance shaft had become our meeting place. At precisely 2 a.m., I slipped from my quarters during the 3-minute camera loop Wells had programmed into the security system. He was already there, looking even more haggard than earlier. I accessed their secure communications, he whispered without preamble. "Chronos isn't a government division. It's a private consortium of military contractors, intelligence officials, and corporate interests." "How high does it go?" I asked. "Cabinet level, possibly higher." Wells removed his glasses, rubbing tired eyes. "They've been using Project 314 to manipulate global events for nearly 2 years. Stock market predictions, elimination of political opponents, resource acquisition disguised as natural disasters." My stomach turned. "And Stern? She believes she's serving national security interests. She doesn't know she's being used by Chronos to further their agenda." He replaced his glasses. But that's not the worst of it. What could be worse? Wells glanced nervously down the corridor. They're accelerating the human trials. The first temporal transport of a living subject is scheduled for next month. The implications were staggering. Our previous calculations had shown that sending even small objects through time created dangerous quantum instabilities. They can't, I whispered. The mathematics doesn't support it. The temporal disruption would be catastrophic. They don't care. Wells' voice hardened. They believe they can control the outcome, contain any disruptions. They're planning to send an operative back 5 years to eliminate a foreign scientist before he develops certain technologies. We have to stop them. My voice sounded small even to my own ears. We will. Wells pulled a small device from his pocket. I've modified this to interface with your auxiliary receiver. When connected to the main array, it will temporarily expand the transmission range. I studied the device. You want to send the evidence externally. To 2 people we can trust. Your former professor at Stanford, Dr. Michaels, and Vanessa Reyes, the investigative journalist who exposed the defense contractor scandal last year. Hope flickered inside me for the first time in months. When? 3 days from now. The quarterly maintenance cycle will provide our window. I'll create a diversion in the primary systems while you make the transmission. Wells gripped my shoulder. This has to work, Eliza. If they succeed with the human trials, the damage to the timeline could be irreversible. For 3 days, I made final preparations. Each night, I secretly modified the transmission equipment, bypassing security protocols and expanding the receiver parameters. By day, I performed my assigned duties with a mechanical precision that raised no suspicions. On the 3rd day, alarms blared throughout the facility at precisely 3:17 p.m. "Attention all personnel," the automated system announced. "Containment breach in Laboratory 3. Emergency protocols engaged." Guards rushed past my lab. Through the glass walls, I could see smoke billowing from the east wing, Wells' diversion. I had 8 minutes at most. My fingers flew across the keyboard, connecting Wells' device to my auxiliary receiver. The interface flashed green. Connection established. I quickly uploaded our evidence package, including the Chronos files and details of the planned human temporal transport. A message appeared on the screen. Select temporal destination. I entered 2 sets of coordinates: Dr. Michaels' office at Stanford and Vanessa Reyes' secure server, both targeted for June 2021 before the Boulder explosion, when I was still free. Transmission commencing, I whispered, watching the progress bar inch forward. I was so focused on the screen that I didn't hear the door slide open behind me. Only when I felt the cold metal of a gun barrel against my neck did I freeze. "Step away from the console, Dr. Reeves." I recognized the voice immediately. Agent Ryan Thomas, the only guard who had shown me kindness. Or so I'd thought. "Thomas," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as the transmission reached 78%. "You don't understand what they're doing." "I understand perfectly." His voice was flat, professional. "I've been monitoring your conversations with Wells for weeks. Did you really think you could discuss treason in this facility without someone noticing?" The transmission hit 89%. Just a few more seconds. "It's not treason to expose crimes against humanity," I said, stalling. "They're manipulating time, killing innocent people, for the greater good." The pressure of the gun barrel increased. "Step away, now." The console beeped. 100%. Transmission complete. I raised my hands and turned slowly. Thomas's usually kind face was now a mask of cold determination. Behind him stood Director Stern and 2 other agents. Disappointing but not surprising, Stern said, her blue eyes piercing. "Bring Dr. Wells as well." They gathered everyone in the main atrium, all 100-plus personnel of the Nexus facility. A makeshift platform had been erected in the center. Wells stood upon it, hands bound behind his back, face bruised and bloody. Director Stern's voice echoed through the cavernous space. Dr. Marcus Wells has been found guilty of treason against the United States. His actions have compromised national security and endangered countless lives. I struggled against the guards holding me at the front of the crowd, forcing me to watch. "No!" I shouted. "He was trying to stop you from destroying the timeline." One of the guards struck me hard across the face. I tasted blood. Wells looked directly at me. His wire-rimmed glasses cracked, a strange calm in his eyes. "It's worth it, Eliza," he called out. "The truth is worth any price." Stern nodded to someone off-platform. A man in a black tactical uniform stepped forward, raising a pistol to the back of Wells' head. "This is the consequence of betrayal," Stern announced to the assembled staff. "Remember it well." I screamed as the shot rang out. Wells crumpled to the platform, his blood spreading in a dark pool beneath him. My knees gave way, but the guards held me upright, forcing me to witness every moment. Stern approached me, kneeling to meet my eyes. "Your transmission was intercepted," she said softly. "Nothing reached the outside. Nothing ever will." But I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. She was lying. "Take her to solitary," she ordered, rising. "Maximum security. No contact with anyone but essential personnel." My new cell was smaller than a prison bathroom. A concrete box with no windows. A narrow cot bolted to the wall. And a stainless steel toilet in the corner. A constant light burned overhead, making sleep nearly impossible. For days, I saw no one except the guard who silently delivered meals through a slot in the door. Sometimes I heard footsteps in the corridor outside, but no voices. The isolation was its own form of torture. On the 7th day in solitary, my auxiliary receiver, which they hadn't discovered in their search of my original lab, activated. The small device I'd managed to conceal in the lining of my shoe vibrated against my ankle. With trembling hands, I extracted it and read the message glowing on its tiny screen. "They will kill you on August 18th, 2022. Final solution in progress." The signature was unmistakable. My own quantum key. This message had come from my future self. I sat on the edge of my cot, the cold concrete wall against my back, and began to tap my fingers in their familiar pattern. Index, middle, ring, pinky. Wells was dead. I was alone. And in just over 3 months, they planned to kill me too. But the message told me something else. Something Stern didn't know. At least one of our transmissions had gotten through. Somewhere outside this underground prison, the truth was spreading. And my future self was still fighting. I closed my eyes and began to plan. In the low light of my isolation cell, I studied the tiny receiver in my palm again. The message still glowed faintly. "They will kill you on August 18th, 2022. Final solution in progress." My own quantum signature, my own warning. May arrived with no change to my circumstances. The same concrete box, the same merciless overhead light, the same silent guard delivering meals through the slot. But behind this enforced stillness, my mind raced. If my future self had managed to send this warning, other communications remained possible. Wells's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. I began to document everything using the only tools available, a dull pencil and flimsy paper they'd reluctantly provided for therapeutic journaling. Each night I wrote in the microscopic script, recording every detail of Project 314, every conversation with Wells, and every name connected to Kronos. During the day, I concealed these notes in the thin gap between my mattress and the wall. On my 11th day in isolation, the cell door opened to reveal Director Stern flanked by 4 guards, including Thomas. "Dr. Reeves," she said, her voice colder than the concrete walls surrounding me. "Your expertise is still required. You will be escorted to Laboratory 8 for 4 hours each day to continue your work. And if I refuse," my voice rasped from disuse. Her thin lips curved into that predatory smile, "then we'll find ways to make your remaining time extremely unpleasant." Laboratory 8 was smaller than my previous workspace, with triple the surveillance and guards posted both inside and outside. The equipment had been modified, restricted to prevent unauthorized transmissions. Or so they thought. "You'll be developing stabilization protocols for the upcoming human trials," Stern informed me on my first day. "Your previous indiscretion has not diminished your value to the project." I nodded meekly, putting on a show of defeated compliance. When she left, I began my assigned work while secretly assessing the equipment. They'd removed my auxiliary receiver, but the primary array remained largely intact. A plan started forming, not just to send another message, but to create something far more powerful. Through May and into June, I meticulously built my quantum trap, a cascading transmission protocol disguised as stability enhancements. Each day I added a few lines of code, modified a circuit, and adjusted a parameter. The guards watched, but didn't understand. Only another quantum physicist would recognize what I was creating. Agent Thomas was assigned as my primary escort. One day in mid-June, as he stood watch in the corner of the lab, I noticed him studying me with an unreadable expression. "May I have some water?" I asked, breaking the silence between us. He approached with a paper cup, and as he handed it to me, he whispered, "Security sweep at 1400 hours. 7-minute window." My hand trembled slightly as I took the cup. Thomas returned to his post without another word. At exactly 1400 hours, the surveillance cameras cycled through their daily diagnostic reset. 7 minutes, just as Thomas had said. I worked frantically, embedding a critical subroutine into the system. The next day, Thomas positioned himself to block the camera's view of my workstation for a crucial 30 seconds. "There's talk outside," he murmured. "Leaks about Project 314. 3 senators asking questions." Hope flickered like a fragile flame. "Our transmission got through?" "Partial data. Enough to start investigations." He shifted, his voice barely audible. "Stern is under pressure. Kronos is scrambling." In July, my plan accelerated. During each lab session, I encoded quantum instructions, micro packets of information designed to piggyback on the facility's regular temporal communications. Each packet contained fragments of evidence, mathematical proofs of the damage Kronos was causing to the timeline, and instructions for receiving future transmissions. "Why are you helping me?" I finally asked Thomas during a rare moment when we were alone in a corridor. His eyes remained fixed ahead. "My brother was on that bridge in Michigan." The fabricated disaster. One of 37 people who supposedly survived because of my warning. Except he hadn't. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Don't be sorry. Be effective." By late July, whispers reached me even in my isolation. Guards speaking in hushed tones outside my cell, not realizing how sound carried through the ventilation system. Another one dead. Found him in his apartment. That's 4 Kronos executives in 3 weeks. Saying it's heart attacks, but nobody believes that. One afternoon, Thomas slipped me a folded note with my meal. It contained 3 words: "Timeline war begun." The implications staggered me. Our evidence hadn't just exposed Kronos, it had triggered interventions across multiple timelines. Temporal ripples affecting past, present, and future simultaneously. The very scenario Wells and I had feared most was unfolding, but perhaps in our favor. My work in the lab became more urgent. I no longer needed to hide my intentions. The temporal disruptions occurring globally had created so much chaos that my activities blended into the background radiation of anomalies. "They're dying of temporal cancer," Thomas informed me during early August. "Cellular breakdown from timeline contamination. The human trials are postponed indefinitely." I nodded, unsurprised. "And Director Stern?" "Recalled to Washington. They need scapegoats." On August 7th, I completed my final modification, a quantum cascade protocol that would replicate my message across multiple times and locations simultaneously. Not just a warning, but a complete package: evidence, instructions, and a roadmap for dismantling Kronos. That night in my cell, the tiny receiver hidden in my shoe vibrated once more. The message was different this time. Completion confirmed. History rewritten. Sacrifice necessary. I sat on my cot, my back against the cold wall, and for the first time in months, I smiled. My fingers tapped their familiar pattern: index, middle, ring, pinky, but without their usual anxiety. I understood now. My death on August 18th wasn't just inevitable, it was necessary. The final component in a temporal equation I had written across multiple timelines. I had become both the messenger and the message, creating a closed loop that would ultimately unravel Kronos. Thomas appeared at my cell the next morning, his face grave. "It's working," he said quietly. "Whatever you did, it's working. But they know. They're moving up the timetable." "When?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. 3 days, August 10th. 8 days before my predicted execution date. The timeline was moving already. My quantum cascade was rewriting history faster than I'd anticipated. "Is it worth it?" Thomas asked, doubt clouding his features for the first time. I thought of Wells, of the 19 colleagues who died at Boulder, of Thomas's brother on that Michigan bridge, of the countless others who had been sacrificed for Kronos's manipulations. Time isn't just physics, Thomas. It's justice. As he turned to leave, I realized with perfect clarity that I had succeeded. My death would come, perhaps on the 10th now instead of the 18th, but it wouldn't be an end. Across multiple timelines, multiple versions of myself were fighting the same battle, sending messages backward and forward through time, creating an unbreakable web of truth. I had become quantum entangled with my own destiny. My sacrifice was necessary, but through it, history would be rewritten. Kronos would fall. I closed my eyes and waited for the future I wouldn't live to see, but had helped to create. The morning of August 18th, 2022 arrived with the same bright light that had greeted me every day of my captivity. Thomas had said they'd moved it up to the 10th, yet here I was, still breathing on the 18th. The timeline had shifted again, returning to my original warning. I made the final entry in my hidden journal with the stubby pencil they'd allowed me to keep. My fingers were stained with graphite, the pages filled with microscopic writing documenting every aspect of Project 314 and the Kronos conspiracy. I slid the journal into its hiding place between the mattress and the wall one last time. The quantum cascade I'd embedded throughout the system over these past months was complete. Last night, I'd activated the first phase from Laboratory 8 under the guise of routine maintenance. My fingers tapped their familiar pattern against my thigh: index, middle, ring, pinky, but without the usual anxiety. Instead, I felt an unexpected serenity. At exactly 9 Gao a.m., the door to my cell slid open. Director Stern stood in the entrance, her navy suit as immaculate as ever, her blonde bob framing a face carved from ice. Behind her stood 4 armed guards, including Thomas. His eyes met mine briefly, giving nothing away. "It's time, Dr. Reeves," Stern said. I rose from my cot without resistance. "I know." She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "You seem remarkably composed for someone about to be terminated." "Death is just another point on the timeline, Director," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "And timelines can be rewritten." A flash of unease crossed Stern's face, quickly masked. She gestured for the guards to escort me. As we walked through the corridor toward the central atrium, the same place where they'd executed Wells, I noticed the facility felt different, quieter. Personnel avoided eye contact as we passed. Some stations sat empty. "Your project is already failing," I said as we entered the atrium. "You can feel it, can't you? The instability." Stern's jaw tightened. "Your delusions won't save you, Dr. Reeves." I smiled, the expression feeling strange on my face after months of captivity. "They're not delusions. I've sent thousands of messages across the timeline, each containing fragments of evidence, each creating quantum entanglements that even Project 314 can't track or erase." "What are you talking about?" Stern's voice carried the first hint of uncertainty I'd ever heard from her. A quantum encryption spread across time itself. The more you try to manipulate events, the more visible the pattern becomes. I stopped walking, forcing our procession to halt in the center of the atrium. "I didn't just send messages to specific points, Director. I created a cascade." The phone in Stern's pocket chimed. She hesitated, then answered it, turning slightly away. I watched her posture stiffen, her knuckles whitening around the device. "That's impossible," she whispered into the phone. "Contain it immediately." When she turned back to me, her perfect composure had cracked. "What have you done?" "Let me guess. Evidence is emerging worldwide. Kronos operatives dying of temporal cancer, witnesses coming forward who shouldn't exist, digital records appearing in secure systems that were never breached." The guards shifted uncomfortably. Thomas remained still, his eyes constantly scanning the room. Stern's voice dropped to a hiss. "You've destroyed years of work. National security was never your concern," I interrupted. "Kronos wanted power, control, the ability to reshape reality according to their interests. But time doesn't work that way. It fights back." Her blue eyes hardened to glacial chips. "Finish this," she ordered the guards. "Now." The guards raised their weapons. I felt no fear, only a strange sense of completion. I had become quantum entangled with my own destiny across multiple timelines. My fingers tapped their familiar pattern one last time. Index, middle, ring, pinky. "Close your eyes, Dr. Reeves," Thomas said quietly. I did, expecting the impact of bullets. Instead, I heard 3 rapid shots, followed by shouts and the sound of bodies falling. When I opened my eyes, 3 guards lay on the floor. Thomas stood with his weapon trained on Director Stern, who had frozen in shock. "Agent Thomas?" Stern's voice trembled with disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" "Not exactly," he replied. "The Thomas you knew died 3 timeline iterations ago. I came back through a stabilization loop Eliza created." My breath caught. "You're from another timeline." He nodded without taking his eyes off Stern. "One where your plan partially succeeded. I volunteered for the temporal transport to ensure it works completely this time." Stern's face contorted with rage. "You're both insane. This facility is locked down. You'll never escape." "We don't need to escape," I said, moving toward the central terminal in the atrium. "We just need to finish what I started." Thomas kept his weapon trained on Stern as I accessed the terminal. My fingers flew across the keyboard, entering the final activation sequence for my quantum cascade. The screen flashed green, protocol accepted. "What are you doing?" Stern demanded, panic edging into her voice. "Collapsing all timeline manipulations simultaneously," I answered, watching the progress bar advance. "Creating a temporal reset that will preserve the evidence while neutralizing Kronos' ability to make further changes." The facility's lights flickered. A deep rumble vibrated through the floor beneath us. "You'll destroy everything!" Stern lunged forward, but Thomas blocked her path. "Not everything," he said. "Just the corrupted branches. The primary timeline will stabilize." The terminal chimed its completion. Instantly, alarms blared throughout the facility. Emergency lights bathed the atrium in pulsing red. "Attention all personnel," the automated system announced. "Quantum containment failure. Evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." Stern's phone chimed again, more urgently this time. She stared at the screen, her face draining of color. "They're all dead," she whispered. "The entire Kronos board. Simultaneously, across 3 continents. Temporal cancer. The final stage. The universe correcting itself." The rumbling intensified. Ceiling panels began to fall as personnel rushed toward the exits. "We need to move," Thomas said, grabbing my arm. "The facility will collapse as the temporal waves converge." "What about her?" I nodded towards Stern, who stood paralyzed, still staring at her phone. "She's irrelevant now. The timeline will deal with her." As if on cue, Stern doubled over, clutching her stomach. I recognized the symptoms immediately. Cellular breakdown from timeline contamination. The same fate that had befallen the Kronos executives. Thomas pulled me toward an emergency exit as the facility began to disintegrate around us. Concrete cracked, equipment sparked and failed, the very air seeming to warp with temporal distortion. "Did we succeed?" I shouted over the chaos. Thomas's face showed grim satisfaction. "Project 314 is exposed. The evidence is spreading across every database, news outlet, and government agency worldwide. Time itself is rejecting their manipulations. We reached the emergency stairwell leading to the surface. Sunlight I hadn't seen in over a year." "What happens now?" I asked as we climbed, the facility continuing to collapse beneath us. "That's the beauty of it," Thomas replied. "For the first time since Kronos began their interference, the future is unwritten." We emerged into the blinding Arizona sun, the desert stretching endlessly before us. Behind us, the Nexus facility imploded, sinking into the earth as temporal waves consumed it. My fingers tapped against my leg one final time. Index, middle, ring, pinky. Not from anxiety, but as a farewell to the pattern that had carried me through my darkest moments. Time was free, and so was I.